Thank you so much, and hello everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. It is a real pleasure to see such strong interest in this topic, which sits at the intersection of innovation, compassion, and the urgent need to improve care for people with advanced progressive conditions. My name is Dr. Kathy Payne. I'm the Research and Project Manager for the European Association for Palliative Care. The EAPC is a membership organisation of professionals committed to the promotion and development of palliative care throughout Europe and beyond. And our members are united by our vision, which aspires to see palliative care availability and accessibility wherever and whenever it is needed. Despite increasing recognition of the profound psychological and existential burden experienced by people with advanced progressive illnesses, such concerns often remain insufficiently addressed across health systems. This challenges us to explore new approaches that are both evidence-based and person-centred. Today you will hear about the EU-funded palliative or PsyPal project, which is a European grant to fund robust clinical research into psychedelic assisted therapy in 4 different progressive conditions. So that's chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, multiple sclerosis, ALS, which is also known as MND, and Parkinson's disease. This work represents a thoughtful and carefully governed effort to explore new therapeutic possibilities with a rigorous scientific framework. So we hope you find this webinar will offer valuable insight, that it will stimulate discussion and contribute to a broader conversation about how we can better address psychological suffering in serious illness. Thank you for joining us, and we really look forward to the discussion ahead. We will keep questions to the end, but please do feel free, as you think of questions to ask, to pose those in the chat as we go along. And we will have plenty of time at the end of the webinar to address any questions that you have. So without further ado, I will hand over to a video presentation from our first presenter, who unfortunately could not be with us today due to clinical commitments. So Dr. Simone Veronese is a palliative care physician from Italy and Vice President of the EAPC. And today he is going to present on the psychological and existential palliative care needs of people with advanced progressive illness in Europe. So over to his presentation now. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Simone Veronese. I am an Italian palliative care physician, and I'm actually serving as Vice President of the European Association for Palliative Care. I'm honored to have been invited to talk to you about the unmet psychological and spiritual existential needs of people suffering from chronic progressive diseases that are part of this important EU-funded project called the PsyPal. So I would like to start this talk by offering you this fundamental framework describing the needs of a person facing an incurable condition as proposed by Dame Cicely Saunders. She was the founder of modern hospice movement and of palliative care. As you can read, there are at least 4 big domains of potential suffering that define what she called the total pain. We generally focus on physical aspects of care, like physical symptoms, that are very important and at the base of what we call the palliative medicine as a medical specialism. But as we will see, psychosocial, spiritual, and social issues are also deep cause of suffering in this population. And when we talk about psychological and spiritual or existential distress, we must remember that these are not synonymous. We're not talking about the same domains. Psychological are more related to mood changes, fears, difficulties to adapt to continuous losses, and often affect families and informal carers during the disease, but also in the bereavement phase of family members, of course. Spiritual distress is more related to values, moral aspects, loss of dignity and meaning in life. And also, obviously, religiosity can play an important and helpful role sometimes, but in other situations can be potentially an extra burden for people maybe unable to find support in their faith or feeling abandoned or betrayed on their deep beliefs. So you probably all know well these graphs that describe what generally happens to patients during their journey with incurable diseases, like cancer in the first one, the blue one, or organ failure, as you can see, for example, in COPD, heart failure, but also many neurological conditions. And the third one, the green one, is frailty and dementia. So what these graphs show is what happens to the body of the patient. So it can offer information on what is called the performance status, or the need of physical care, or the level of autonomy and symptoms, of course. Physical symptoms are described over here. And palliative care services often are provided based on these needs and these trajectories. But what about the other needs? Well, Professor Murray, he showed in this paper that in the different trajectories, psychological, social, and spiritual suffering do not overlap with physical suffering. So, for example, we can have a person in a very bad shape, in a very bad condition, but well adapted in the other domains. So not suffering, for example, because they have adapted to the condition they have, to the situation they are living. And on the other hand, maybe you can have a person in a very good physical condition without physical symptoms, but experiencing huge fears, desperation, and maybe also seeking to end his or her life because of this suffering. So looking specifically at neurological conditions, the EAPC, together with the European Association of Neurology, the EAN, published a consensus document on the role of palliative care in neurology. Among the recommendations, many psychological aspects emerge, affecting patients and families through the trajectory of the disease, often from the moment of diagnosis of the disease. Think, for example, in ALS. But for some, they can affect patients and families for a very long time. Think, for example, what happens in multiple sclerosis or Parkinson's disease. And another very recent and interesting white paper has recently been submitted for publications by 3 EAPC reference groups on spiritual care, neuropalliative care, and education and training. And this white paper, which is currently under review, so I cannot spoil you the content of it, but I can tell you what this is about, explore the spiritual and existential needs of people with neurological conditions, and shows the importance of recognizing and addressing these needs, but also the barriers to these, and the need for education of professionals involved in the care, not only palliative care professionals, of course, or even neurologists and all the other professionals involved in the care, because we all need to be educated in order to recognize and address these needs. So dealing and helping people about psychological and spiritual distress can be particularly challenging because of different trajectories that are represented by neurological conditions and how this can affect the quality of life of patients and their loved ones. So some conditions are unpredictable. Think, for example, MS. Or some are acute and aggressive. Think stroke or ALS. And some have precarious plateaus. And then this could generate doubts or false hope of recovery. Or, for example, we have dementias and all the conditions impacting the cognitive functions of patients where it's very hard to impact on psychological and spiritual needs due to the fact that people really struggle to understand or it's difficult to communicate with them. For this reason, in my country, in Italy, the National Associations for Palliative Care and for Neurology joined forces to publish a document called Triggers to Palliative Care in Neurological Conditions, where 6 diseases have been explored by working groups of palliative care professionals and neurologists trying to define specific triggers for palliative care and how generalist and specialist palliative care providers can best help. Patients associations have also been involved in order to have their important point of view. So you can download the document. It's in Italian, but I think with artificial intelligence it's very easy to have a quick translation in your language if you need it. But the PsyPal project involves also COPD, which is not neurological, but is a respiratory condition. And we know that COPD is the fourth cause of death in the world and often is not recognized as a terminal condition, but it is cause of suffering and can cause also psychological and existential issues. And for example, shortness of breath, which is probably the most specific symptom of this condition, is not only a physical symptom, because it leads to fear of dying or choking to death. It can generate anxiety and panic attacks. But also there can be spiritual issues, like, for example, sense of guilt related to the fact that people maybe have smoked their whole life. And this can affect patients, but also their relation with their relatives. So we as professionals are not always supported for this, sometimes amplifying these fears or spiritual distress. This is why we need good and strong studies like the PsyPal in order to have more weapons to tackle this suffering and help with these unrecognized and untreated symptoms. So I'm going to the end of my brief presentation and overview about the psychological and spiritual needs of people with palliative care needs, and specifically addressing the PsyPal project as well. And I hope that this could help setting the scene for the rest of the webinar. I thank you all for your kind attention, and I'm looking forward to meeting you all at the next EAPC Congress that will be in Prague in May. We will have space and room for networking, for meeting each other, to talking about these needs and the project as well. So I really hope that we can meet each other over there, and I wish all the best to you and to our next presenters. Have a nice afternoon. Bye.
So apologies for that small blip, but we will get back on track, and thank you to Simone. So the next presenter is Professor Robert Thruvers. He is Professor of Psychiatry and the Head of Department of Psychiatry at the University Medical Centre in Groningen. He's also the lead of the EU Horizon PsyPal project. So Robert, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy, and good afternoon, everybody. We're happy to have so many people in this session. It shows a lot of interest, and it shows that we also have a responsibility to do this project in the optimal way, because it may potentially affect the lives of so many patients. By the way, I'm a psychiatrist. I'm head of the psychiatry department, and I'm interested in psychedelics because even though we have quite a number of evidence-based treatments, there is still substantial unmet need, and specifically in patients in palliative care. This is my conflict of interest. Basically, this study is paid through public funding, so there is no restriction in whatever way to discuss results and the whole setup. As Professor Veronese has already very eloquently described, people in palliative care may face a lot of challenges, including psychological distress, whether it's existential, whether it's directly disease-related, whether it's something else, and this affects quality of life. It affects in a negative way also. It may affect also even the medical treatment outcome. And a big problem is that regular psychotherapies and or antidepressant treatments for depression and anxiety are not very effective, or are even doubtfully whether they are effective in this patient group. And they usually also take a relatively long time to get the wanted effect. So that is why this is, in our view, a clear unmet need. And you just heard Professor Veronese on that also. And in the field of mental disorders, mental problems, there has not been a lot of innovation over the last, well, you could even say 20 years if you compare it to other medical fields. And that's how we got interested in the potential of psychedelics. This started with small pilot studies, and then a bit larger studies with at least the promise that these kind of compounds could catalyze psychological processes in a beneficial way. Psychedelics is an umbrella term. Psilocybin is a classic psychedelic. It's from the mushroom. 5-MeO-DMT is from the Mexican frog skin. It's tryptamine, and MDMA comes from the lab. And they all have different chemical structures, different working mechanisms, but there is overlap in the psychological, the potential, the hoped for psychological consequences. Psychedelic assisted therapies, which is what we are using in the PsyPal trial and what many people in the psychedelic treatment field are using, is a combination of psychological support, building up a relationship with the patient, making a person feel secure, making a person feel able to give over control, because you will be in a situation where you will experience all kinds of feelings and thoughts and memories without a lot of steering. So that is really something you need to be able to open up to. This is a picture of a dosing session. And after the dosing session, we have integration sessions where we discuss everything that a person has encountered in this journey in the psychedelic session, in order to make sense of it and in order to reconnect it with the everyday life of people. So when I'm talking about psychedelic treatment, I'm talking about the whole package. There's a lot of research on what exactly do these compounds do. In the right under corner, it appears that they loosen cognitive inflexibility. So they loosen the tendency to murmur or to always be in the same psychological loop of negative thoughts, of not seeing any better outcomes, and it may lead so far as becoming suicidal and not seeing that life is worth anything, etc. And this is a condition that is found in many mental disorders and many mental problems, and also definitely in something that you would call existential distress, psychological distress. And then if you look at the mechanism, when you put people in a scanner under the influence of psychedelics, you see that, and that sort of is in line with the cognitive flexibility that increases, that different circuits in the brain are more active, and that there's also more crosstalk between different circuits of the brain, which appears to be in line with psychologically being more open and being able to see different perspectives. And on the level of the neurons, it's very likely that psychedelics increase neuroplasticity, so the connection between neural cells and the activity of neural cells in certain areas of the brain. So it seems that all of this is coherent and underlines the wanted psychological effect. However, even though there's a lot of hope, there's also serious challenges and unknowns. For example, if you do a clinical trial, a lot, especially in the field of palliative care, has been open label case series. So small studies where a relatively low number of patients was treated with a beneficial effect. But as psychedelics have a strong immediate subjective action, it is not easy to find a credible placebo. So it could be that part of the outcome is what you might call placebo. And then there is very little standardization in psychological support or psychotherapies. Then there is a lot of discussion on if these kind of treatments come closer to clinical application, what should we regulate? Who should be the persons providing these therapies? Should they be licensed therapists? Should they have extra training? And we have seen in the field, we have seen incidents where unlicensed people may have crossed very precious boundaries in the contact with patients or in the contact with people attending sessions. And then given also a bit of a hype in the field, have we monitored adverse effects as well as we should? And then lastly, if people have a beneficial effect, does it last? Does it last for really a significant period of time, which would merit all the investment that you need to do? Because as I just explained to you, also the psychotherapy component is rather substantial. And all of these kinds of concerns loomed in the room when the FDA rejected the MDMA for PTSD trial. I think many people of you will have heard of it. And that was sort of a blow to the field that maybe we should do our homework better. Maybe there's also some kind of a bias towards these novel treatments. But there were, I think, real questions on a number of these issues. So basically the challenge for the field is design clinical studies of sufficient quality and size to address these concerns. And we are very happy that we were able to interest the EU Horizon program to support this study. So the PsyPal study, psilocybin therapy for psychological distress in palliative care, is a multi-site, double-blind, placebo-controlled clinical trial, where first of all we want to study safety and efficacy of psilocybin in reducing depression severity as one of the aspects of psychological distress. And then we have a whole range of secondary objectives, changes in anxiety, changes in demoralization, changes, of course, maybe even more important, quality of life, changes in caregiver burden. The caregivers are very much part of this project. And of course, we are researchers. We want to study the neurobiological and psychological mechanisms I very briefly alerted to earlier. The study takes place in patients with 4 different chronic medical conditions. And as Professor Veronese nicely showed, the burden of these conditions and the course over time may differ, also with differing needs over time. And our more exploratory aim is, does psilocybin therapy help patients with their psychological problems across these different medical illnesses? As a placebo, we have a low dose psilocybin, so we don't have a totally inactive placebo. And based on learnings from earlier clinical studies, we have 2 dosing sessions with ascending dose in the people who are allotted to active treatment. And before I forget, all participants at some point are able to be treated with psilocybin, because after the double-blind phase, there is an open-label continuation phase where the people who have been allotted to low dose are offered a session with active dose. So this is basically the overview of the trial structure. There is the whole preparation, then there's the 2 dosing sessions, and the blue lines you see in between all are talk sessions. So in the beginning, there are preparation sessions. Between 1 and 2, they are already integration sessions. So to address what came up after the first dosing session. And then there's 3 more integration sessions at the end of the double-blind phase. And then we have, very importantly, a long-term follow-up where patients are supported through an online platform and also through peer support networks. And that is to address questions on, can we maintain initial results? What is the need for care of patients, of carers? And we employ all kinds of research methods, both quantitative and qualitative. So we also ask a lot of questions from patients, from carers, from therapists, to see what we can learn from this project, how we may improve, whether we have missed really important stuff. And we collaborate with patients and representatives in all stages of the project. Here is another slide of the peer support groups and the digital care platform. So this is not just a short-term project, but also we specifically have the ambition to see whether it improves patients' lives also on a somewhat longer term. So these are the key elements from PsyPal. I'm not going to read all of them to you because I think I have addressed them during my talk, but maybe you could read them later. It's a collaboration across Europe with 19 organizations in 9 European countries, 4 clinical sites, but a whole range of other organizations. And for all of us, it is a very valuable learning experience. And we are very happy to be able to carry out this project. We have also been involved together with other people in the psychedelic research field in thinking ahead. So one of the elements that I haven't told you about is that within PsyPal, we also like to think about what happens if this study comes out positive, what happens if governments, medical boards in different European countries move towards formal registration. And I just showed the slides of the FDA and the MDMA discussion, and the European Medicines Agency is also very actively interested in the field. And they have asked a number of us to present the dilemmas and potential solutions. And they wrote a really worthwhile position paper that has been one of the documents that we, again, could use as input for the study design. Because we are talking...
1 minute, please, Robert, sorry.
1 minute, yes. I think we're doing fine. Thank you, Kathy. So we are thinking of new models of care where set and setting are important, where you need to think about training and certification. You need to think about payment, all of this. We are part of a European psychedelic research network, and very recently we also obtained a doctoral networks project where we have 16 PhD positions on a range of different aspects of psychedelic treatments, which will definitely also strengthen the reach and the collaboration. And with that, I would like to thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to answer questions after all the presentations. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Robert. And please do, if you have questions, put them in the chat for us. And we have Nico, who is collating those for us at the moment. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our next speaker, Ian. Ian Ruller is the co-founder and co-director of the Psychedelic Participant Advocacy Network, known as PsyPal. And Ian is going to speak this afternoon about participant needs and ethical considerations in clinical trials. And Ian doesn't have slides, so you will be looking at Ian for this. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Kathy, and thanks everyone for being here today as well and attending this important session. Yeah, so authenticity is very important to me. So just want to say that my mental health hasn't been great lately, so I may not be as focused or as articulate as I would prefer to be. But hopefully all goes well, and by mentioning that, it will probably help it to do so. And yeah, as Kathy said, you'll just have my face rather than slides to look at. So I hope that's okay. So I'll just go into a little bit of my personal background, then I will talk briefly about PsyPal itself, and then I will go into the ethical considerations and around clinical trials. So I've taken part in 2 clinical trials myself, both examining the effect of psilocybin on treatment-resistant depression. One at Imperial College in 2015 and the second at King's College in 2019. And the first trial was open label, so everyone received 2 active doses. Everybody knew they were going to receive active doses. One was 10 milligrams, and then a week later, there was a 25 milligram dose of psilocybin. And while that trial and those experiences were far from easy, the clinical team around me were really vital in supporting me every step of the way. Ultimately, that first trial enabled me to feel self-compassion for the first time ever. And it also helped to reframe my depression forever. I went from viewing my depression as something I needed to get rid of and cut out of myself, to viewing it more as an ongoing relationship with myself. And that's really helped to soften the low points ever since. I was lucky enough to experience an afterglow after that first trial that lasted for about 3 months, and then my depression slowly returned over the following 3 months. This was in great contrast to the second trial, which was placebo controlled, but very happy to say I was lucky enough to receive an active dose of 25 milligrams. That trial, the single dose I received, the experience was very dark, difficult, harrowing. I resisted the psilocybin, I pushed back, tried to retain control, and I only really let go with about an hour left of the 6-hour trip. And yeah, it was very tough, but once again, the amazing team around me led me through every step of that. But sadly, as the drug was wearing off, as the psilocybin was wearing off, my depression returned, which, as you can imagine, having had the afterglow before the previous time, I was devastated. And again, that's where the team were really vital in helping me to reframe my experience. And that really, ultimately, they helped set me on a different, more somatic therapeutic path, which I continue to follow today. And it hasn't been easy, but I've been off antidepressants ever since that second trial. So yeah, we're looking at 7 years now. So these 2 very different outcomes really demonstrate that participant needs vary wildly, even for the same individual, from session to session and dose to dose. With psychedelic assisted therapy, everything is amplified, which means nuance and paying attention to every detail is extremely important. Robert mentioned set and setting, so a person's mindset and their surrounding environment. And I would argue that that really begins even before the trial, even from the recruitment advert onwards, and goes on long after the dosing session as well. And I would also argue that integration begins immediately after, if not during the session. So where participants are immediately after the session and during the days, weeks, and months afterwards is vitally important. So ensuring participant well-being is really one of the key reasons I set up PsyPal with Leonie Schneider 5 years ago. I met Leonie via what was the pilot of Dr. Rosalind Watt's ACE integration program, which both me and Leonie are now facilitators for as well. Leonie has also taken part in 2 clinical trials as well. And even between our 4 experiences, there are wild variations. And that really brought home the importance of having more voices and more experts by experience to learn from. So these different experiences have really helped form PsyPal's aims, which is to build a community of participants, connect and empower those participants, and pool participant lived experiences in order to help increase safe access to psychedelic assisted therapy, help create more effective treatment models, and help shape a model of best practice across the sector. Briefly, our work is very broad and deep. We're involved in PPI work, so patient and public involvement work. We help with research, and so does the community that we've built. We're involved in consultancy work, public advocacy, policy shaping, and we also provide peer support groups for people who've received psychedelic assisted therapy. So I just want to zoom out to look at some of the ethical challenges facing the sector. And before I zoom back in to specifically look at the PsyPal trial itself. So as Robert mentioned, there's currently a pushback against the value and inclusion of the therapeutic component of PAT. The FDA and EMA do not regulate therapy, that's the argument, so it's hard to standardize, etc., get these treatments approved. Some also argue that the drug on its own does the work. So we would argue that we need to ensure that psychedelics are seen for what they are, which I think Robert also mentioned. They're really catalysts rather than cures in and of themselves. They seem to be able to speed up the therapeutic process, but while they may enable breakthroughs and epiphanies, psychedelics on their own often end up being a nice break from whichever condition you're living with until you come back home again to the same circumstances and the same issues. So this is the key argument, really, why we need to maintain therapy, and we really all need to work together to find a way to ensure that that happens. Another issue really is around placebo-controlled trials and the safeguarding risks that brings. So people that are placed in placebo groups in these trials are often so disappointed that that can become a safeguarding risk in itself. There's such hype and expectation, and that has something to do with this disappointment, but you can't help feeling that way when you've lived with a treatment-resistant condition for decades and nothing has worked to help you with it. So this is where, again, as an organisation, PsyPal would argue that we need to make open label extensions standard wherever possible. So again, as Robert mentioned, this is where participants have the opportunity to receive an active dose if they're on the placebo arm of the trial. We'd also argue for compassionate access for former participants post-treatment, as has recently been approved in Germany and has been argued for by Eddie Jacobs in a paper called When the Trial Ends, which I'd highly recommend reading. Other issues include, abuse within the space and equity of access. So there are several well-publicised abuse cases and ethical violations that have been out there in the media. Obviously, we need to try and eradicate abusers and predators from this space. There's kind of a feeling within the psychedelic space that we're more progressive and it's a safer space, but my belief is that this complacency can even have the opposite effect, where boundaries are more likely to be violated, with people kind of being almost within the space held up and worshipped. Also, as far as the equity to access of these treatments, it really isn't the case at present. Many people receiving these treatments are white, educated, and middle class. We really need to expand that pool. I think MAPS have done amazing work in this space, so it's proof that it's possible. So how do we challenge these issues? Well, making sure we're accountable, calling out the behaviour of others as far as the abuse side of things goes and ethical violations, and avoiding this sense that we need to protect the sector. You know, we just need to call ourselves and each other to account. And as far as access goes, we really need to work with those marginalised and underrepresented groups to ensure that we can improve the access to these treatments. The next issue really is around the lack of aftercare and what I call the post-treatment void. So many participants finish their trial and they don't know where to turn or what to do next. The trial can end abruptly and all ties are cut immediately so as not to compromise the data very often. This can lead to people feeling very isolated and alone, maybe even more alone than they did before the trial, even if the treatment has been a success, because they've got nobody to speak to about their experiences. So one way to tackle this is to ensure that there is a cohesive ecosystem of support in place, a pathway for participants to step onto post-treatment that they're informed of by the clinical team before their trial or the treatment ends. This can take the form of integration groups, community gatherings and activities and peer support, which Robert has also touched upon. It would be good to know how I'm doing for time at the moment, because there's a section that I can kind of skim more. So if
About 5 more minutes, if
5
that's
minutes.
okay.
Okay, well I will skim a little over the next bit so that we're to time. So yeah, there are various kind of concerns, but also hopes within, you know, what's going on in the sector at the moment. There is a concern at the moment that profiteering and corner cutting will lead to safeguarding risks, and this is a larger issue than clinical trials specifically. But as larger pharmaceutical companies become involved, the specialist knowledge required to safely deliver these treatments and those nuances that I mentioned that are all important, and the care needed afterwards is increasingly overlooked. This again is where we can all work together. You know, PsyPal is hoping to provide and is providing training to clinical teams, etc., to ensure that these oversights don't occur. And I'm heartened to say as well that there are more people currently including open label extensions within their trial protocols, which is really, really heartening to see. Another concern is that the human element may be completely removed from trials in the favour of using AI or technological tools. That would be a huge mistake. Again, you need the human element within this. A lot of people feel ultra connected to others when they receive a psychedelic. So to remove that from the treatment protocols would be a huge mistake. So once again, how do we counter this? Well, we ensure that we maintain, you know, we see technology as an additional tool rather than a replacement of the human element of the delivery of these treatments. There's a push towards at the moment shorter acting psychedelics. So this isn't relevant specifically to PsyPal, but because psilocybin's being used, but there's this idea that the faster acting psychedelics will be better because you can get more people through the door, basically. But that's really not taking into account the huge effect that, say, a drug such as 5-MeO-DMT has on people, and the huge amount that can bring up for people. Arguably, integration and you know, that people need more support sometimes than they do with psilocybin with those shorter acting psychedelics. My hope is ultimately that there are choices and options available for people dependent on what's right for them, rather than just what's faster and cheaper to administer. Hopefully we'll see a model eventually when these treatments come to market where combinations of different psychedelics may be available at different stages of someone's treatment journey. My main concern is if safeguarding isn't prioritized and these corners are cut, that the whole psychedelic assisted therapy sector could be derailed, because all it takes is a few you know, awful cases or loss of life for the media to pick up on that, then politicians to pick up on that, and we end up back to where we were several years ago, where these potentially groundbreaking treatments just aren't available to people. So to come back to PsyPal, I would say that the PsyPal project has really modelled best practice by asking former participants to feed into the trial protocol from day one and involving them in helping create everything from the recruitment ads through to the delivery of aftercare. They've also ensured that therapy, as Robert mentioned, is an integral part of the trial, which is extremely important. They've also created a trial protocol that includes an open label extension, so everyone's able to receive an active dose, therefore that safeguarding risk is removed. And as Robert mentioned, they've also included facilitated peer support groups as part of ongoing care for participants. This enables people to feel a sense of community, connection, creates an environment where people can be fully seen, heard and understood, and can help continue the ongoing process of making sense of their experiences and integrating them after the trial. PsyPal has also helped provide training for PsyPal group facilitators, drawing upon the experiences of facilitating both our own peer support groups and the facilitation work that both Leonie and I have done during our work with ACER integration as well. So there are specific considerations beyond the ones that I've mentioned on a more general level that are unique to people receiving palliative care. And really that comes down to taking into account people's current health and therefore their energy levels and their ability to take on the huge administrative burden that often comes with taking part in a clinical trial, endless questionnaires, scales, follow-up sessions, etc. Also their capacity to take part in peer support groups, etc. as well. So maybe, you know, we had discussions around tailoring the length and frequency of these groups to ensure people are able to participate and benefit from the groups fully. So really just to close, we come back to the importance of paying attention to detail and nuance, the importance of listening to ongoing feedback from participants to help meet their needs and shape their ongoing care. It's really important that there's a consistent learning process, learning from this feedback, and that constantly gets fed in to better treat, safeguard and support future participants. This is really the model that we would advocate is used for all psychedelic clinical trials and ongoing treatments when they become legally available. And we're very happy that PsyPal has been closely involved throughout PsyPal's journey so far, and that this collaborative environment of knowledge sharing and mutual learning continues with lived experience and participant well-being placed at its very heart. So yeah, that concludes my talk, and thank you for listening and for being here today.
Thank you so much, Ian. Thank you for sharing your experiences, and I'm sure there will be lots of questions coming to you after that. So our final presenter for this afternoon is Taresh Haro. He's the founder and executive director of PAREA, which is the Psychedelic Access and Research European Alliance. And Taresh is going to speak now on the research and regulatory landscape for psychedelic therapies. So over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. Hi, everyone. I want to start by thanking the European Commission's Health Policy Platform for making this webinar possible. And I also want to express my gratitude to Ian for being with us, for sharing his lived experience and speaking so eloquently about the needs of participants of psychedelic therapist trials. So, as Kathy mentioned, I lead the work of PAREA. I will be speaking today about the research and regulatory landscape for psychedelics, especially in Europe, but not only. The webinar, there will be a recording, but you can also download my presentation should you wish to. I'll also display this QR code a couple of more times. So I want to start by saying a little bit about PAREA. So our work and this alliance was born out of this conviction that we need to start embedding the work of psychedelics more meaningfully into the trusted institutions of medical research. And that means professional societies. And here among our members, you can see European Psychiatric Association, Association of European Cancer Leagues, and more. Very importantly, we also have among our members EU-wide patient organizations such as Pain Alliance Europe, but also PsyPal. This is PAREA, and our mission is scientifically grounded, safe, equitable, and people-centered psychedelic-assisted care. When psychedelics are approved, people should have them available within their existing healthcare frameworks at the place where they live, from the doctor that they trust, and paid by a health insurance. We also speak about psychedelic-assisted care because we believe that this treatment modality will be most effective when it's integrated into broader therapeutic frameworks that we heard just the importance of psychotherapy. So we believe that definitely psychotherapy should be included in long-term support and comprehensive care beyond just kind of a one-off session. And we've been also in the past good with mental health care in providing acute care, but not so good in providing a continuity of care. So that is something very important to us. Now, nothing exists in the vacuum, and this work should be really contextualized within the scale of the burden and unmet needs that we see in the area of mental health. And you can see here that mental health is the biggest, it's a single largest contributor to long-term EU health. We speak a lot about the burden and the mortality, deaths from different conditions like cancer or cardiovascular, but what does it mean to live with a condition, how this affects our life? And for instance, it's been shown that depression was found to lower the quality of life more than diabetes, more than death, more than divorce. And you can see that, mental health conditions really surpass all the other chronic and non-communicable diseases when it comes to this burden of living with a condition. There are huge treatment gaps, and we really don't have enough options for people with persistent mental health illnesses. And most of us will know someone who is struggling with mental health issues and who hasn't found relief through existing therapies. And we see that trends are really going in the wrong direction, even as more people seek care. And that's not something that we see. It's not true for cancer. It's not true for heart disease, or diabetes, or almost any other medical area, any other area of medicine. So the scale of unmet needs is massive. And you would think that because of the huge prevalence of mental health conditions, innovation is somehow addressing it, but very sadly, it is not. And mental health and psychiatry still suffers from this deep structural neglect when it comes to innovation, which is why projects like PsyPal are so important. And you can see here, it's industry figures. Psychiatry has the lowest share of commercial trials of all medical fields in Europe. In 2023, it was just 2%. And so that's the kind of the bedrock and the context for psychedelics. And we see that for the first time in decades, transformative solutions in mental health care, such as psychedelics, become available, are within reach. You see here a huge influx grow in clinical interest, in research interest in the last 2 decades, in terms of trials, in terms of publications, in terms of these research institutes that have centers on psychedelics. The first one actually happened in Europe at the Imperial College London, and many others followed, such as Johns Hopkins, Yale, UC Berkeley, and so on. And there is a real breadth of clinical work, of clinical studies. What you see here actually are only commercial clinical trials, and it's a kind of a concentric circles, bullseye chart, where the closer you are to the middle, the closer you are to the regulatory approval with one therapy approved, which is Spravato, Janssen's and Janssen's, though it is to be argued whether this takes the format of the psychedelic assisted therapy. But there are also a lot of trials that are really close to the approval. Many clinical trials in this darkest blue circle, in phase 3 trials. One of them have recently published the results on, when you count both the phase 2 and phase 3, there were more than 1,000 trial subjects or people in the trials, and the trial met their primary endpoint, and likely an approval will come, at least in the US, in the next 12 months. And that shows also the problem that we have, because the majority of these trials that you can see here are not happening in Europe, or are not targeting Europe immediately for regulatory approval. And we also know that now there is this policy in the US, most favored nation drug pricing, which doesn't help either, because we see already in the last 10 months a sharp decline in new applications in the US, in Europe, from companies, 35% less new applications. So this is a big issue, and the US has kind of an armamentarium of different incentives and things that are attracting companies. One of them is what's called FDA Breakthrough Therapy designation, and 7 clinical trials of psychedelics have received this designation. You can see here full list, and we don't really have much of this in Europe, and we shouldn't be just kind of waiting for the best, but really do something about this. The good news is at least that now we have one kind of equivalent to that. So the European Medicines Agency has this scheme called Priority Medicines, and just a few weeks ago, bretisilocin has entered the PRIME designation. Bretisilocin is a phase 2 compound for the development of major depressive disorder. It's relatively short-acting, it's 2 hours, and perhaps in the next few years this will be the first psychedelic therapy approved in Europe. We'll see. But all these issues make us at PAREA think, what can we do to attract more innovation in mental health in Europe. And just a few months ago in November, we launched a policy paper called From Lagging to Leading, a Policy Toolkit for Mental Health Innovation Made in Europe. And in this paper, we proposed this European mental health moonshot. You will not see a lot in this slide, obviously, but in the shared presentation, you will have a link if you'd like to see it in more detail. But we are proposing this moonshot, which would be a bold, mission-driven initiative supporting high-risk, high-reward research. To that end, we are proposing European Mental Health Research Hub. We also we see a need to increase the capacities for delivery, and here we are proposing the European Mental Health Care Capacity Initiative, which is mirroring something that was suggested by the European Commission's DG Sante in the comprehensive approach to mental health. We also want to see that, ensure that the new discoveries translate into better lives for Europe and are available. And as such, we are also proposing regulatory sandboxes for psychedelics, ketamine for treatment-resistant depression, and psilocybin for end-of-life care. We brought our proposal with us, proposals to the meeting with the European Commission's Research Commissioner, Ms. Zaharieva, in a meeting in November last year. We also mentioned about them alongside, in the letter co-signed by the MEP Action Group on Psychedelics in Healthcare that was sent to the Commission's President, Ms. von der Leyen, and we were very pleased a few weeks later in December to receive a reply acknowledging the importance of mental health. So we are taking our asks to the highest levels. And a couple of other developments, there are a lot of unmet needs, both in terms of mental health and also in the kind of innovation landscape, but there are some promising developments as well. And Robert mentioned the EMA multi-stakeholder workshop, which took place over 2 days in Amsterdam 2 years ago. We've also seen last year a publication of updated clinical guidelines of depression by EMA, which now are including a dedicated chapter to psychedelics. And there is also a number of publications released by regulators, especially the EMA. You can see them here, which are discussing both the therapeutic potential and challenges related to the development of psychedelic treatments. And of course, there is a EU-funded research, PsyPal. Robert also mentioned Integrate project. There is a cost action, and very importantly, last year, Horizon Europe, which is the EU biggest kind of research program, published a call for 50 million euro that will fund 6 projects, clinical trials in the area of mental health innovation, and a number of psychedelic related projects and clinical trials are kind of progressing through this process. So we very much hope that in the next half year or so, we'll learn that there will be at least 1 or 2 additional projects like PsyPal investigating therapeutic potential of psychedelics. And in terms of the clinical research specifically in Europe, there are more or less 40 clinical trials with these new medicinal products. The biggest area is depressive disorders, 19 trials with psilocybin appearing 22 times, and then ketamine. The majority of them are small, non-commercial, single country. So again, it's really important, but we need more. We need more institutional support, especially for larger trials. In terms of indications, there are some usual suspects, mood disorders such as PTSD, but also alcohol and cocaine use disorder, anorexia, gambling disorder. So, many of them may be not immediately associated with this field. Prolonged grief disorder, but also a number of neurological indications. You can see here seizures, disorders of consciousness, some neurodegenerative conditions, and pain-related disorders. I think someone made a comment earlier today in the meeting from the cluster headache community. So I think there is one trial here, also a trial for fibromyalgia, neuropathic pain, and some more. So, a long list, a lot of promise and hope that this brings to people that are affected by these conditions and are not helped with existing treatments at the moment. And I want to finish by also mentioning that on top of the clinical research, we start seeing these pockets of real medical access in different countries. Globally, it started globally, but now we have, Switzerland has already had limited medical use for 10 years with LSD, MDMA, and psilocybin, where psychiatrists can prescribe this to patients. Last year, Germany announced a compassionate use program with psilocybin for treatment-resistant depression, and also Czech Republic rescheduled psilocybin for refractable mental health conditions, and both countries are introducing access. This year, we are also working at PAREA with Ukraine, where a law has been proposal published, and now there are consultations to reschedule a number of psychedelics, especially for people affected by PTSD and war. And these early access programs are really important because, again, very likely first psychedelic therapies will not reach Europe anytime soon. And yet we could do something to help people in need. And I see you, Kathy, appearing, so I take it I have a minute left or less. And we can also start building infrastructure and expertise, these kind of pockets of access where limited pilots could teach us how to deliver psychedelics best and give us this experience with this new treatment form and train physicians. So PAREA is working with many other countries to hopefully create more pockets of access through these programs. So with this, thank you very much for your attention, and I'm happy to take any questions if there are questions from you.
Thank you, beautifully timed. And now we've reached the Q&A portion of this afternoon's webinar. Thank you to all the speakers. I think you've given lots of food for thought. So I'm going to just start off with some of the questions that have come in already, but please do feel free to add more questions. So the first one, I think, Robert, is to you. And it came in ahead of the webinar today from David, who wants to know the thoughts about exposure to nature and biophilic experience, which I had to Google. It's really about integrating natural elements, materials, and forms into built environments to foster a connection with nature. So he's asking how these could maybe be combined with psychedelic interventions to support intended results. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, thank you, Kathy. Yes, I think such input and influences and atmosphere can be helpful for a beneficial effect. And our Swiss colleagues would usually provide these treatments in nature settings. And that's also what some of the retreats, which is not medical treatment, would do. Also in our center, we have a special room that's more quiet with where the window looks on a green area. But so I think all of that addresses the setting aspect that both Ian and me talked a bit about. And I think these are ways to optimize the experience and also to provide a certain atmosphere where you may be more easily able to let go. I'm not sure if we can prescribe it, because then you would limit probably settings who might be doing a great job in treatment, but who would not have those kind of surroundings.
Um,
I'm wondering, Ian, from your perspective,
Yeah, I was just
have you
saying,
any
can I
thoughts on this?
briefly add, it was just my personal experience, but it's not uncommon. So after the first trial I took part in at Imperial College, and I was deemed sober enough to leave the clinical unit, I was actually staying on campus due to a tube strike, thankfully. So I had time and space after the high dose to explore a little. And near Imperial College, there's a huge green space, and I was just drawn naturally to seek out nature when I was allowed out of the clinical unit. And just to still be in a fairly heightened state and have that around me even post-dose was really, really key. And there are certain things I experienced there. I kept my shoes on and whatever, but feeling the spongy grass beneath the soles of my shoes is something that I've been able to tune into ever since that moment, that helps to ground me and helps to calm me. So I think if it's possible, and I understand it's very difficult maybe in the clinical trial phase to do this because of the variables that it may bring potentially, I don't know, a bit like having group sessions or whatever, but to have that element of nature there, I think would be really, really key to, it's such, I mean, set and setting, it's so key, as Robert mentioned, and yeah, not to be in that clinical sterile environment. A lot of work has gone into making those less clinical and less sterile, but yeah, to be immersed in nature, I think would be hugely beneficial for many people.
Thanks, Ian. So a question again, Robert, to you about how to manage with older people who maybe are on a large amount of other medication, but may benefit from psychedelics towards the end of life, and should maybe some of the medications be stopped before the administration of psychedelics, or what happens there?
Yeah, that's a very good question again. We treat people with severe medical illnesses who have all kinds of ongoing treatments. So we are very aware of that. And we have made extensive lists of medications that can or cannot be combined with psilocybin. And we try to be lenient, but there are certain kinds of psychiatric or pain or other medications that you cannot combine, and then we either try to taper, or if this is not possible, then it could be a reason for exclusion. But for example, with antidepressant, many people would have some kind of antidepressants, and even if they're not very effective, tapering might constitute a challenge in itself. So we try to be very pragmatic, and we would not always taper, but we would provide the psychedelic as add-on for SSRIs and SNRIs, because there seems to be very little risk. So we really have zoomed into what are the regular treatments that a pulmonologist will give for COPD and a neurologist for MS, etc. And how can we try to navigate so that especially these patients are able to participate.
And a question that's also come in about the reasons that we've chosen the particular patients for this study. So was there consideration of other neurological diseases? Did we consider maybe patients with stage 4 cancer, like has been done in Canada, and a query around, would the sticking to just certain groups have us struggling to have enough patients to do the trial?
Yeah, I can understand the question. So regarding oncology patients, the call specifically was for non-oncology palliative care patients. So we responded to the call that was put out by the EU. And the year before, the same call was out for oncology patients, and we also applied for that one, and we nearly didn't get it. But well, as you all know, as we all know, writing grants is something that needs time, and hopefully they get better every time. But we would have liked to also include oncology patients, and I don't see a real good reason to choose for one group of medical patients over another. And then to move to your next question, or to the next question, we try to take care of the patients in the trial as good as possible. These are really medically ill patients, so we like to collaborate with our medical colleagues from the specialties that treat these groups of patients. So we haven't said everybody can join regardless of your chronic medical illness, but we collaborate with a pulmonologist and his group in our department who see a lot of COPD patients, and with whom we can really provide an environment where there's oxygen and there's all kinds of safeguards also during the sessions and after. And that may be specific for specific illnesses. So that's how it came about. But it could have been different medical indications depending on local circumstances and collaborations.
Thank you. There was a question as well about the representation of the different groups that we have in our research. So how are we planning to have a balance for sex, gender in the active and placebo group? And are we recording data, for example, about ethnicity of those who are joining the study?
It is one of our goals to have a diverse group of patients, and I think Ian was addressing that in many of the psychedelic trials up to so far, the participants have been predominantly white, well-educated, already interested in psychedelics. And I do think that at this point we see a different patient group. For example, COPD patients do not usually fit that profile. So there is really a different socioeconomic area that you cover. And on the other hand, given the in and exclusion criteria, it is a challenge to recruit enough patients. And basically because we are not recruiting patients who already would come to you because they're so interested in psychedelics. That in itself stands for a lot of diversity. And it also is really a challenge to recruit enough patients given their medical status, given a whole range of other stuff. But we do record these characteristics, but we, up till so far, we haven't had the luxury of saying, well, we have now had 10 patients from this and this specific group, and we close this stratification and we go to that's not our reality at this point.
Thank you. So Nico was, so it's more of a comment than a question, but I think he'd like your opinion on he would often like to suggest making mental health a physiological issue, so seeing the brain as an organ like any other, because he feels that possibly issues with the liver or the kidneys or the gut maybe get easily accepted, and maybe issues with the brain less. So your kind of thoughts on that.
And for Josh as well, later on.
Tadeusz, would you like to answer that? Is that what you're saying? Sorry.
Yeah, sure. Happy to answer that, given also that I spent nine years working at the European Brain Council. Yeah, I think it's a very valid observation. When someone has diabetes, you don't go to this person and say, kind of, get your act together. It's okay. You'll be fine. It will pass, whatever. And obviously, that's what we are doing with a lot of mental health conditions. Another problem here is that we do not see the value of paying for mental health interventions. They seem expensive. A lot of people say that psychedelic therapies will be expensive, but we have other therapies that go into hundreds of thousands of euros or even millions now for gene therapies. And I think we should really stop saying that mental health treatments are expensive, because they are not, because they provide tremendous value. But coming back to the mental versus kind of brain health arguing, I think for me it's very contextual, because as I said, there are reasons for that reframe. But I also want to say that, as we know, our mental health is shaped by psychological, social, environmental factors as much as by brain chemistry. We spoke that there seems to be little effectiveness of antidepressants for end of life care, and you do not necessarily kind of treat a loss of meaning with drugs. For instance, we know from WHO that more than 800,000 people annually, 800,000 deaths annually are related to loneliness and so on. So I would say, we need to be careful. We also need to be careful with something that can sound a bit dehumanizing, that our thoughts, our emotions are mechanistically caused. They are only caused by imbalances in brain chemistry. And I am personally very principled about agency when it comes to mental health treatments. I think we should give people agency every step of the way, and the treatments should be kind of done with people, not for them. And so here, I just want to be, always careful and kind of, bring up brain health when needed, but also acknowledge that mental health issues are so much wider than the problem with our organ, even though ultimately kind of everything is filtered through the brain. But I think, the story is much bigger than just our brain chemistry.
Thank you, Jess. I'm very conscious we've only got a few minutes left and a lot of other questions, so I'll hopefully just blast through these quickly. One in a question about the study design, and it was about the 15 milligram dose followed by 25 milligram and the rationale for that, Robert.
Yeah, we did a qualitative study in the context of the COMPASS phase 2B study. And we interviewed patients with depression who had been through the whole treatment. And one of the things they told us that one high dose session, which was the study design at that point, to them, not having had any earlier experience was a bit much, and they felt it as overwhelming. And a number of people told us that they would have had more benefit from the experience had they had a bit more gentle run-in dose in a first session. There's a lot of debate on that because people might also say, well, you need a certain dose in order to get the real psychedelic effect. But also given the sometimes brittle medical condition, we felt it would be a better idea to have a more gentle buildup. And what we've seen up to so far is that patients seem to appreciate that approach. But of course, we are totally blind, and it's only after that we can really give you any results on that.
And a sort of a slightly related question for the last one. Do current therapy models in palliative care, the psychedelic assisted therapy, account for individual differences in baseline executive functioning or cognitive decline? And how might this impact the outcomes?
Yeah, that's a difficult one to answer. This might impact the outcomes. We have made an amendment to broaden the MOCA inclusion criterion, for example, because for some patients this was a threshold where we felt that even though their MOCA was on the relatively lower side, we felt they were they might very well benefit from this treatment. They were totally aware of what it was about. They were able to decide on it. But given sometimes their educational level, age range, medical disease, we loosened this and some other criteria for that reason. It's only after that we could perhaps stratify according to cognitive score and see who benefits most. It's really not something we can tell at this point.
Thank you so much. So with that, I think we are at time. So I want to thank our speakers very much for their time and their interesting presentations and their answering to the Q&A this afternoon, and to Abigail and Wendy from the EU Policy Platform for hosting us today. We really warmly invite you to stay connected with our project, with PsyPal, follow our work and engage with upcoming activities. And there is the option also to sign up for our newsletter if you're interested in that. And I'm hoping someone will post that on the in the chat so that you have access to the PsyPal website for information. Real progress really depends on us working collaboratively across disciplines and settings, and also including the voice of the patient and the wider society. And again, thank you so much to Ian for his thoughts. Thank you everyone for your time and your participation this afternoon. We really truly value your engagement, and we really do look forward to continuing this conversation with you and hope that you will stay connected. So thank you so much.